Nick Saban says it would be disrespectful to leave the SEC out of the college football playoff. I want to agree with that, but I want to agree with it now. I don't necessarily want to agree with it in 5, 10, 15 years when Nick Saban and Kirby Smart have both retired. I feel like they deserve the benefit of the doubt. If you're deciding between a 4 and a 5, and a 5 that's never been there, let's take a TCU, and they're really even, and you're a committee, and you're subjective, you're not objective, which I would prefer with a formula. If you're subjective, I'm giving it to the guy who's done it before and put up a good showing in the college football playoff. I'm leaning towards Kirby Smart or Nick Saban in this particular scenario. So would it be disrespectful to turn your back on them? Yeah, I think it would. I think if it's a 50-50 split, or even maybe a 60-40 split for the other team, I'm going with Alabama and Georgia, getting them the college football playoff because I know they'll show up. And at the end of the day, what is this, Caleb? It's a television show. It's entertainment. And I know those guys are going to show up. So disrespectful or dumb, pick the word. But yes, I would agree with that.
I am so mixed on this. Because in principle, I want to agree with you. And let me break this down a little further. For those who think there's an SEC bias because of the number of times the SEC plays and gets the number of invites SEC gets to the college football playoff, the number of times they play in the national title. There was a year in the BCS where two SEC teams played each other for the national title. Dave, you know that one well, in 2011. If you think there's an SEC bias, you have not paid attention to history whatsoever. The SEC has earned all the bias it got. And if you really think there's an SEC bias, here's a stat for you. There was only one team in the BCS era from a BCS conference to finish the whole season undefeated and not play for a national title. That team would happen to be Auburn, an SEC team in 2004. Mm-hmm. So if anything, there was a bias against the SEC. And they kept winning to the point that committee members finally had to actually automatically give the SEC the benefit of the doubt, because against non-SEC teams in the national championship game every year from 2006 to 2010, an SEC team won. And then it happened again in 2012, 2011. And here's the other factor to this. Typically, when a controversial team gets into the playoff for the national title game, a team that we don't think deserved it, that barely got in, they almost always lose and prove us right that they didn't deserve to get in. Unless they're an SEC team. They get in, the controversial one, Alabama 2011, when they got the rematch with LSU, they proved they belong. They blew out LSU. Alabama 2017, Georgia 2021, every time they win it. So the SEC has more than earned it. And in terms of actual talent, no serious person is going to say that Alabama and Georgia aren't two of the 4 best teams in the country. And then lastly,
I agree with everything you said.
Yeah. It is a television show. I want to believe in body of work and most deserving, but I don't want to see Georgia TCU in the national title game. That's not good for anybody.
No, let's be honest. TCU played one good game last year, but did anybody think that would be the case? And Georgia kind of played flat. I mean, I thought that TCU would be a 1 and out and get blown out by 30 points, just like everybody else that has done that, like Cincinnati. That wasn't the case, and kudos to them, but that's probably going to be the case most of the time. Here now, this is going to be, they like to say, a mute point in Ottawa. So this is a mute point in Ottawa, not a moot point in Ottawa. But it's going to be a 12-team playoff. So we've got a couple people saying, oh, it doesn't really matter. You know, a 1-loss team. No. We're talking about 2-loss teams when this turns into a 12-team playoff. So if you're a 2-loss Tennessee team and you're a 2-loss TCU team, who will be in which conference? Big 12?
They're still in the Big 12.
Okay. Give me somebody else. How about somebody that's not in the major conference that's really highly respected?
Well, no, this debate is actually versus major conference. I would still give the SEC the benefit of the doubt versus the Big 10 or the Big 12.
Okay, let's go major conference. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to ratchet up my own argument. If you're Alabama or Georgia and they have you're Tennessee, you have 2 losses and you played an SEC schedule, okay? And you're Southern I would say 2 tough teams will fall in their schedule a year. There's 3 teams really in the Big Ten to worry about: Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan in no particular
But
order.
Washington and Oregon will both be there next year too, to be fair.
Okay, so Washington and Oregon, I mean, that's a pretty stout conference. I would feel the same way about them as I would any team from the SEC, but the SEC just has more history. So if there's going to be, and remember, it's a television show, you're going to get great ratings, and that's a factor. Sorry, it is. So, Caleb, as I look at it like this, I would give the benefit of the doubt to the SEC for at least the next 5 years, and maybe longer than that. If it's a 2-loss team that's on the verge of making the playoffs and a 2-loss Southern California team that's on the verge of making the playoffs, I'm going to lean towards the 2-loss SEC team, Tennessee or whoever it might be.
I agree. And this principle will apply with the 12 team that's applying this year. So here's why it's so tricky this year, Dave. Alabama, say hypothetically, Alabama beats Georgia, which I think we all, that's going to cause chaos if Alabama beats Georgia. The committee's praying that Georgia wins, right?
Yes.
If Alabama beats Georgia, and then Florida State, Michigan, and Washington all win, so you have the 3 undefeateds: Florida State, Michigan, and Washington. We know, you and I both know that Alabama would beat Florida State by 40 right now on a neutral field, right? And so then there's Texas, who has 1 loss. Say Texas wins. Even though I think Alabama is better than Texas right now, can you really put Alabama in for benefit of the doubt of the SEC when Texas beat Alabama? Like, that's the real that's the question for the committee. Do you hold by that head-to-head principle, or do you hold by what you know is true, which is that even though Texas beat Alabama at Alabama, Alabama's the better team?
Well, see, here's why I love Rocky Top Tom's contribution to the program. He says, and this is a perfect example of what is disgusting about the prospects of a 12-team playoff. We're talking right now about 2-loss teams being in. 2-loss teams will be in. He calls it, goes on to call it sickening. I have no problem
Agree,
with
Rocky
that.
Top Tom.
I totally disagree. What other sport do you have to go undefeated to have a chance to win a championship? There is no other sport.
What other sport has regular season games etched in our memories as some of the greatest games in history? Okay, the Kick Six is the greatest spectacle in the history of sports, and it was a regular season game between Auburn and Alabama. That wouldn't matter in this era. Nobody would remember it. The only NFL has wild finishes like that in regular seasons. Nobody remembers it. You know what they remember? The Immaculate Reception, because it was a playoff game. But
right.
But
and the NBA is the same way. The first thing I thought of was Larry Bird and Dominique Wilkins. They had that showdown, but that was the first round of the playoffs. No, you're right. But what is wrong with that? You've got one. Give me your most prominent college football memories quickly over the past 5 years. Kick Six has been a little bit longer, right?
10 years. Well, past 5 years, the playoff has been in existence. I think the playoff ruined the sport.
Ruined it. It's at an all-time high. Television ratings are up.
I still think it ruined the sport. I think it's a long-term mistake. Look, this is a debate we'll get to in a second because I wanted to talk about the effect it's going to have on conference title games. So I want to stick with the SEC real quick on this.
Okay.
So Dave, where do you go though? Do you put Alabama in over Texas? Do you put them in over FSU even though Florida State's undefeated? Or do you just leave them out altogether? Who do you put? Do you replace Alabama with? Do you replace Texas or Florida State with Alabama if both win this weekend? If Alabama wins,
ask me that question one more time.
If Texas and Florida State both win, Florida State's undefeated. Texas has 1 loss but beat Alabama. And so if Texas and Florida State both win, and Alabama wins, to put Alabama in the playoff, you have to put them in over Texas or Florida State. Would you do that if Alabama wins?
No, I would put the team that beat Alabama head-to-head. How many losses does Texas have again?
Texas has 1.
Okay,
and beat Alabama head-to-head. But what about Florida State? Florida State's undefeated.
You know what I think about the ACC. So, again, that would come down to what Nick Saban said about, do you give them a slight preferential treatment? And I believe you do. So I would take...
So you go ahead and put Alabama in over an undefeated Florida State.
Yes.
And
that would be we're Alabama winning, right?
We're assuming this is assuming Alabama, Texas, Florida State, Michigan, and Washington all win.
Well, definitely definitely the safest thing that you could do is just win all your games. And somebody that knows safety is Herald Group Security Solutions, leadership, experience, specialization, addressing problems through unique mission-specific mitigation techniques. Your workspace could be safer. Your children's school could be safer. We're working with private schools now. We're going to expand that to public schools. So reach out to them, your school administrator, and say, check out Herald Group Security Solutions, heraldgrp.com, heraldgrp.com. Now, going back to what you said, the Immaculate Reception happened. We all remember it. That Larry Bird game happened. We all remember it. At least I do. There are playoff moments that would have never happened had these teams not proven worthy in the regular season. It's not like they showed up and went 0-16 in the NFL and then suddenly we're making Immaculate Reception plays in the playoffs. I mean, to say that the regular season doesn't matter at all is really grandstanding. It matters a lot. You better win 10 games to give your chance a shot at making the college football playoff. And you better think about the fact that you could host a game at your home field, which would be awesome at Neyland Stadium or any of the other stadiums in the SEC. And you would like a bye. So with the way they've set it up, I have no issue. Now, if they hadn't set it up that way and it was 1 versus 12 and 2 versus 11, Caleb, I'd be on board with you. Because I think 1 versus 12 would be a blowout. 2-11 would be a blowout. 3-10 would be a blowout. No fun. But the way they've got it set up now, and you're not going to hear me say the NCAA is awesome a lot, but because they didn't do this. But the College Football Playoff Committee, they did it, and they put it together. This is golden. It's fantastic. It's going to be almost as it will be the second biggest thing to the Super Bowl within 5 years. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the championship game or that's going to be the semifinal day. Because personally, I don't know about you, but I like the conference. It wouldn't be the conference champion. What's the divisional playoff round? Because you've got 4 games in the NFL. So I don't know what weekend or what it's going to be, but it's going to compare with the biggest sporting events, which is basically the NFL in our society.